Hello, and welcome back, Ding Dongs. Josh from Press Play and Scream joined me for what was supposed to be a double feature of films by Martin McDonagh, In Bruges and The Banshees of Inisherin. But the discussion on In Bruges went on for the full length of the episode, and we really wanted to give The Banshees of Inisherin equal treatment without making, say, a 3.5 hour long episode. So here we're going to pick up our discussion on The Banshees of Inisherin. Enjoy. This movie, though,
man, it's different but the same.
It is, and the setting. Here we are in 1923 Ireland, on an island, the fictional island of Inisherin. When I looked up the name Inisherin, he made this up, and when you translate it and break out the Irish dialect, it actually means Island of Ireland. But the island of Inisherin is fake, but it's filmed, of course, in various places throughout.
And filmed beautifully, of course.
Oh my God. If you don't want to go there immediately after watching this, then man, I don't know what world you're living in, but.
And you said it was 1923, but the whole look of the thing to a certain degree, because that actually surprised a lot of audience members who found that out after the fact. They were like, I just assumed that it was now, but that everyone had old shit because it's a fucking Irish island in the middle of nowhere, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
The trouble sort of like going on across the water, which they're not now, but like there's a timelessness to the entire look of it. Could have been the 60s, could have been the 40s.
I'm with you. When I first watched this, I didn't know actually the year that it was taking place. I actually went in completely cold on this one. I saw who was in it and who had made it, and I knew I was going to watch it. So I just, I was like, oh, we're watching this. So we put it on. It actually took me a bit to realize how early in the 20th century it was.
Yeah.
Because a lot of islands, even to this day, don't have cars on them.
Exactly.
Mackinac Island in Michigan, for instance, no cars allowed on the island. It's all horse-drawn carriages and whatnot, getting around even today. The whole timeless aspect of it still applies, but I also love how they put a very huge attention to detail on the costuming of this movie. All their clothes were handmade, hand woven fabrics, hand crocheted and knitted sweaters. Like everything was made. Yeah. Exactly, and dyed the same way and everything. And I'm kind of a fashion slut. I myself am not a fashion wearer because I'm not rich. But I love this kind of stuff when I read about the costuming aspects of a movie, because the kind of detail that was brought into it was incredible. We know we're starting from the ground up of this very authentic setting, and that then is the perfect backdrop when we open on this movie. One of the most adorable things I've ever seen in my life from a human man. Colin Farrell, in his opening of this movie, there's a goddamn rainbow in the background.
There's a rainbow in the background. Oh, what a picturesque, idyllic, life-affirming sequence. You just expect to see a little leprechaun just like dance by with a big...
Yes.
I mean, surely nothing bad is going to happen for the entire rest of this film. We're just going to follow this happy-go-lucky Irish fellow, but we get to the conflict within minutes after that.
Oh, it doesn't, and that's the other thing I fucking love. Like, he just knows how to write a tight story. He does not waste a moment setting this up.
Yeah, he doesn't make anything in his movies feel rushed. If anything, they're sort of laconic. They kind of take their time, but they don't waste any time.
Right.
There's no point at which you feel like, oh, this movie is dragging, let's pick up the pace. But it's not fast. And to paraphrase the poet John Wesley, though he is always in haste, he is never in a hurry. That's filmmaking. When you can make every moment count without making the audience feel like you're squeezing every last moment for everything.
Well, and see, that's the kind of the beauty and kind of the terror of trying to write a movie script, right? Because they always try to tell you, they give you that rule of, 1 minute per page. Wow. And I mean, people break that all the time, but sure, but that's it. Living in your brain is a page of script is a minimum movie time. So
usually it is.
And I mean, we're talking like in Apocalypse Now is a 1,000 page script. I mean, that's, unheard of.
Braveheart, from what I understand, that script was 45 pages. because so much of it is fight sequence, and instead of doing any of it, they just said they fight, and that's about 20-30 minutes worth of movie.
That's so much economy. I fucking love that.
That, to me, a perfect movie is a movie where not a scene feels out of place, not a moment feels like it was put in as filler.
You know what inspired a thought? The introduction of this film almost reminded me of like something from Lord of the Rings in the Shire when we meet Frodo. It's not quite as idyllic as that, but it just feels wonderful. You know, like you're just given this moment. And then, like you said, it's ripped out from under us immediately. And I want to really bring the question here because I'm gonna say what happens. And then we're going to talk about what that is and then what that feels like.
Certainly.
So Colin Farrell's character, he shows up first at his buddy Colm. Is it Colm or Colum?
It's spelled Colm, but it's pronounced Colum, which again is far more ridiculous than this language needs to be.
I know. I'll say Colum is actually easier to say, so I'm actually fine with that. So he shows up at Colum's house because they're drinking buddies. They live on this tiny island off the coast of Ireland, mainland Ireland, and it's a farming community. It's very small. It's very quaint. It's very, there's not a lot going on here, right? So they've been friends for a long time, we can assume. So every day, Paulric goes down to pick up Colum and they walk to the pub together. They have some beers and hang out and talk and whatever, and that's their day. And so this is a day like any other. And he realizes when he knocks on Colum's door, and Colum doesn't answer the door, but he can see him sitting on his rocking chair in front of his fire, but he's just not paying attention. He's ignoring the knock on the door. So Paulric goes up to the pub and he sits there and he's like, "What's up, my friend?" and all this. Well, yada, yada, yada. We eventually come to find out that Colum doesn't want to be his friend anymore. He just doesn't want to speak to him anymore. And not only that, he doesn't give a reason. Not at first, anyway. And at first, Paulric thinks like, "Oh, did I say something while I was drunk? I'm sorry." And again, the way he speaks is very, again, it's simplistic. It's innocent. There's a purity to the way he speaks. He doesn't see evil in the world. He's very innocent in his way of thinking. But to be told by your best friend that you hang out with every day that I don't want to be your friend anymore, and to not get an answer, imagine how that would feel. Josh, like your, partner in crime, bestie, Kelly, who has been on this show before and you co-host with Press Play and Scream. Or imagine me with my buddy Chris, my bestie since high school, who's been on this show a lot. Imagine if either of them said to either of us something like that. What would that do to you?
I live in perpetual awe every day that Kelly remains my friend and puts up with my baloney. But I do see your point. But the thing about that, because it's a very legitimate question, and the thing is that Paulric does not see this coming.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there were not reasons he should have, but we don't know that because we just got here. But we get the sense maybe that probably for quite some time, he's just been ignoring the signs.
That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, like maybe it was this sudden. I don't know. But it seems to me like probably Colin has been tuning out for a while. That being said, were that my situation, maybe I wouldn't want to see that either. Maybe I wouldn't want to acknowledge it in any way or attach any importance on it until it was too late. And
right.
Yes, it would be completely devastating. Certainly it would. And the thing is that, like, again, the reason why these are bookends more than anything is that, yeah, these are not two hitmen. Very different time, a very different context, a different setting. But in the ways that fundamentally matter, it seems to me, these are still pretty much the same characters with different names because, and one of the most instant indicators of this is that opening shot, and we see Colin Farrell's face.
Yes.
Older, and he's got some wrinkles, he's got some gray in his hair, but the way his eyebrows are pointed and everything about his face to a certain degree, he is older, but he's no wiser than he was the last flick that we talked about.
Right, right.
he's still an overgrown boy. And which is why it's so important, I think, if you can, to watch these back to back. Meanwhile, you've got Brendan Gleeson, who has, from the look of it, again, he's got a lot of the same characteristics, but he is aged out of any humor or patience he might have had before. He's clearly tired. He's feeling his own mortality, even more than the last time we saw him when he was dead. And
Yes.
he's tired of carrying this idiot along for so much of their lives together now. And
Yeah.
because, I mean, they have known each other clearly their entire lives. They both came from there. There's not, you know. And then we get to, because, yeah, of course, Parag is completely befuddled. He can't seem to get any kind of get his mind around it. And he goes to his sister, Siobhan, who's played by Carrie Condon, who does an amazing job.
Gosh, she's wonderful.
And he tells
Absolutely
her what's happening, yeah. And she just jokes. Maybe he just doesn't like you no more. It's just a throwaway comment, and it's a light joke. And that simple premise is going to take us to the darkest place we've been.
It is. I liken this to, and I feel like there's a lot of British sensibility at play with this whole setup here, because I don't know how much Edgar Wright you've watched, or if you've seen Hot Fuzz.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, wonderful. So, skipping through, but there's a whole thing of like where all these murders are happening, and it's building up into this huge conspiracy with all these players and all this, but it eventually boils down to that the murders were just being done because they just plain didn't like the person, because they were tacky or doing something meaningless or stupid. Like, all the reasons for the murders were so frivolous and so empty that it was like unexpected. It's almost too simple. And in this case, it's sort of the same thing, because, Colin doesn't want to be Powerg's friend anymore. But, we think, oh, did I say something offensive? What did I do? What happened? I'm going to say sorry for it no matter what. And that's what happens. He's like, I apologize, whatever I said, whatever I did, And then the answer ends up literally being, I just don't like you anymore. And you're dull. I have a limited time left on this earth. I woke up one day and realized that I've been frittering away all these years and I don't have enough left, and I want to do something important, and I want to spend that time with people who elevate me in some way or enrich me in some way. And I'm not going to do it by sitting here listening to you quote or paraphrase talk for 2 hours about the stuff you found in your donkey's shit. It's brutal. I think we all have had friends or acquaintances in our lives that could be described that way, right? Like, they're dull. They kind of get on my fucking nerves. They're just, And
yet like, they're devoted to you.
Yes.
Even though you might not enjoy their company, and you may think that they really suck, or that they bring you down in a lot of ways, or, that every time you see them, they have some ridiculous story of martyrdom that they have to, grab you by the throat and yell in your face. But But they love you.
Yes.
So how can you scrape them off? How can you bring yourself to do it well? If you're Colin, this is how you do it.
Yeah, and I think with Colin, and here's an interesting thing with him, right? Because we get some insights into his POV, and he has depression. I mean, he is the classic case. It should also be noted, because we're going to bring this up as we get through this movie a little further, that 1923 saw the end of an Irish Civil War that was starting to wind down. And so this is all going on in the background. I want to bring this up now, because it's going to become relevant off and on as we discuss the film. But I think that war, and that's why I'm bringing that up right now, and so many of the other things. He's an older man. He's seeing the state of the world. He's more aware of what's going on. Now, I had called Brendan Gleeson's character in Bruges a more wiser, more refined character, right? And you had not incorrectly, Josh, stated that no, he's probably not as wise as he seems. And, he's just exactly. He's a little more thoughtful maybe, but he's not, he's not a fucking, scholar by any stretch. But with Colin, you absolutely see an aspiration to be important, to contribute to society in some way. I don't know if you have ever had or went through a phase as a writer. I know when I first started getting heavily involved in writing, like my big desire was to be important. I wanted to write the science fiction story that would define a generation like so many other writers had done, right? I wanted to be the next George Orwell. I wanted to be the person whose name was dropped in, as the Allison Dixon version of whatever we're referring to. I wanted to be that writer because I grew up watching Little Women a lot, and I took after Joe March and thinking like, oh, if I write important stuff, then I'm going to be remembered and my life will matter. I don't feel that way anymore. I've broken through a lot of that bullshit in my own head, but I relate to it. Like, I relate to what Colin felt and was desiring to be more meaningful in some way. Like, that was a drive that he had.
Well, that's, I feel, talking about two different things, though. Because on the one hand, you're talking about fame and cultural significance. And right. I understand completely what you are talking about there. And of course, most, if not all of us, when we decide that we want to be writers, want that. Not just fame on the surface level, although that's fun to fantasize about, not just money, although that's nice too, but to be able to say that your work has resonated to the point where people know it and you contributed to the overall conversation of humanity.
Yes.
And so there's that. And of course, I used to feel that way. I absolutely don't anymore. As we've discussed, I am a ghostwriter. Generally, probably no one's ever going to see my name on anything I've written.
Which is a shame.
Well, not really. I mean, fame kind of sucks when you look at it now.
Oh, it's true, but I'm complimenting you, so you need to accept
well, I appreciate that. I mean, thank you. But on the other hand, though, there is no point in this movie where we see Colin chasing fame. This is not about that to him. This is about something different. He, plays with these music students who come over to the island and sort of holds court with them, and he's, the older kind of mentor to them. And I think that he gets fulfillment from that. And I think he gets fulfillment from jamming with them. And, and he certainly, again, wants to compose. Not because, he wants to see it played in music halls, or because if he were about that, he'd at least send it to the mainland, if not go there himself.
Right.
And try to actually make that happen. But in the sense of having brought something into the world, if even only a few people knew about it, but that he has created something, that he can be proud of something himself, even if it's only for himself or only for this island that
right.
he knows about or really cares about. It's sort of the middle of nowhere, in terms of Ireland. I think that's what he wants, and that's what's meaningful to him. And again, you feel bad for Pádraig, but I can't really also disagree with Colin either. What he's asking for, to some degree, is reasonable.
I found myself really pivoting a lot because on the one hand, I felt like we aren't allowed to say in human society, really anywhere that I can think of, like, I don't want to be your friend anymore. Have a good life. Goodbye. And you always have to give an answer, or you have to give a reason, or you have to ghost them. It's either you have an ugly discussion you don't want to have,
right,
or you cut them off at the knees, and then you got to live with the fact you did that. That's going to eventually wear off. But it's like, there's never that kind of discussion where it's just like, we don't match anymore. We don't have the same interests, and whatever, man, chill. It was nice knowing you. Like, maybe we can have that discussion with some people, maybe people we don't know very well, or people we haven't spent a lot of time around. But if it's somebody who has been your daily drinking buddy for God knows how long, I mean, probably half your fucking life, with these two, it's like, it's such a hard pill to swallow. And especially if you look at the world the way that Colin Farrell's character does, because he looks at it in a very as I said in the when we were talking about In Bruges, he kind of has this way of just looking at the world like a child, you know, and it's like he's not going to take what Colin says as anything but the direst of affronts. He's not going to ever see that maybe Colin is going through something. I need to give him his space. He's going to know that I care and I'll be there regardless. If somebody I really cared about told me something like, I don't want to talk to you anymore, I'm going, you know, and that's it. My immediate thought would be, what did I do? Oh my God, what did I say? I fucked something up. Like, I got to fix this, because that's just my immediate response to shit. And I think that's what a lot of people would do. I think most people on the outset might feel more in more in Park's court, because it's like, oh, yeah, like, I want to fix this. I want to know what I did wrong. I don't want to lose my friend. Oh my God. Oh my God. But on the other hand, you got to admire the fucking straightforward, like, non-pretentious, I just don't like you anymore. Don't talk to me.
You were talking about the fact that you had gone into this film basically blind. And
yeah,
part, like, I knew that it was the director of Three Billboards. I hadn't seen In Bruges when I became aware of Banshees, but then what I knew about it was that it was these two actors, and that based on the previews, it's about this one guy saying to the other guy, I don't want to be your friend anymore. And I'm thinking to myself, how are we going to stretch that into a quirky Irish comedy for a full movie? Wow.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
But also, like, there's a few things, though, because you were talking about the fact that, I mean, this is, you know, there's terrific philosophy being unspooled for us in this movie. And it's not obvious or explaining, which is, again, what he's great at. But like you said, this is also very much a movie about mental illness. And it exists here in a world that doesn't particularly allow for anyone to identify it themselves or deal with it in the way that they should, which is kind of a parallel for our current world, too, when you come like
so
that.
Much.
We just happen to have more vocabulary. Colin has, as you say, obvious depression, but that's not the word that they're going to use. And then later, and we're going to jump around a bit, but then later, when he cuts off that first finger, he experiences a manic period of actual extreme euphoria. He knows that something's wrong with him. As you say, he even acknowledges it verbally in confession, but he has no mechanism in place to express that properly or to deal with it. The closest things he has to that, or to treatment of any kind, are confession and his music.
Right.
Neither of those is preventing him from going to the extremes of self-harm. But one other thing that I wanted to mention, you were talking about the bluntness of it, and you're absolutely right. This movie is about bluntness in a setting where that seems strange to some degree, because there's the scene very early in the movie where we see the rather ghastly Mrs. McCormick, and she's
like something out of a Shakespeare play.
And you know, they end up chasing out Parag because he's just sort of being mopey and underfoot, and that's 12 minutes into the movie. And it occurs to me that at that 12-minute point, we already have kind of an interesting theme running through this movie of people who are blurting out uncomfortable truths because they're no longer content with simply going around hiding them. And we've just heard Colin's version of that, and now we have heard Parag's when he spills the beans and tells Mrs. McCormick that Siobhan always just sort of hides from her whenever she sees her. You know, Siobhan is completely scandalized. And then another of these that we're going to hear soon enough is that Dominic is regularly sexually abused by his father. And it isn't that surprises or horrifies anyone in the town. It's that someone's willing to acknowledge it out loud.
Yes.
So that's what so much of this movie is tied up in the sensibility. I think of people who have stayed quiet for too long, and they're sick of it.
I mean, that's it, isn't it? I mean, people have stayed quiet for so long, and then you have the another character, she's a very much a side character in this, but a fascinating one nonetheless. The lady who runs sort of the post office and little general store in town, who wants all the latest news, and like, you never tell me nothing. I mean, she's just like, she wants the stories, she wants the tea, and she's desperate for it, and she's pissed off when nobody gives it to her. And it's like, that's their existence here, is they need news because they're cut off in this little fucking place, and they all have to live among each other with all these nasty open secrets. Like, yeah, the kid Dominic, who is amazingly played by Barry Keoghan, I think his name is, and nominated for an Oscar. He was just a fantastic role, and he's treated as the village idiot. He's a teenager, probably around 15, 16 years old, and he factors in a pretty important way, as we'll see, because what we framed out here more or less is something of a feud story, because we have Colin, who doesn't want to be friends with Padraig anymore. And he has given no other reason other than he doesn't like him anymore, that he's dull, and that, Colin wants to spend his remaining days mastering his music and just enriching himself in the things that he likes and with the discussion that he wants to have. That sets the stage. And of course, we mentioned that Colin, he lives alone in his little house on the beach with his dog, and he has a house full of art and books, and he's a fiddler, and so that's his music of choice, and he's has a much more kind of like enriched existence. And then Padraig, he lives with his sister Siobhan, and they care for some farm animals, and there's a beautiful donkey named Jenny. Is that the
Yes.
Thank you.
Jenny from the block.
Jenny from the block. So we've set that stage of all these little things happening. But of course, Padraig cannot live knowing that his best friend has rejected him. So he's trying to pursue reasons why, and trying to force interactions where Colin doesn't want them, right? You can almost sympathize with his desire to understand why. And looking at the fact that the way that he looks at the world, again, like a very simplistic child, he's gone from very innocent to realizing that resentment and hatred and things like that exist in his particular world, and he just can't handle that. Like, that's fucked him up big time. And so, he tries to force these interactions, and there's some very uncomfortable discussions that happen along the way. But I want to jump to the ultimatum here.
I wanted to say, though, because you were kind of talking about these different people, and you specifically said with Colin, he's got his music and he's got his records, and so he's living his books. He's living a more enriched existence. And I think that's kind of one of the major themes of this movie is he thinks he's living a more enriched existence.
Yes.
And you, as people in the audience who love music and literature and think that education equals enrichment, we think that he's living on some level a more enriched existence. But in the end, how much more enriched is his existence than that woman who runs the post office and her entire life is gossip? How much more enriched is his existence than Padraig's love for Jenny and for his sister? Because Siobhan said it perfectly. It's one of the most memorable lines of the movie when she confronts Colin and says, "Why are you doing this to my brother?" And he says, "Your brother is dull." And she says, "Yes, they're all fucking dull."
Yes.
Because, they're all trapped on the same island. It's the only difference is the difference in interests, the difference that are important to them. That doesn't make them more important subjectively, which I think is kind of interesting. He thinks of himself as being lofty with his talk of Mozart and how Mozart contributed. And again, he's no Mozart, first of all, and second, no one's going to know who the fuck he is at any point in in future history. But he has an opinion of himself that's inflated, and some people might agree. But again, everyone's doing their best on that island to make sense of their own personal existence, you know.
And here's the thing too. I'm glad you brought up the "you're all boring" and "you're all dull" moment, because another thing that brought that to the fore as well is a discussion between Colin and Padraig when he says, "I don't want to just spend the rest of my life chatting," and he was like, or with empty chat, and he was like, "No, I'm talking about good chat." You know, that's what Padraig says. Yeah, good exactly. Chat, you know, like, you know, pleasant or whatever, like just chatting. Because here's the thing, you know, there's so many people that don't let themselves enjoy anything at all. They are insufferable in a lot of ways. It's like even the most like anything that seems remotely frivolous or meaningless, they just like, yeah, but did you think about the people in Ukraine? You know, just, you know, when you're talking about seeing a fucking Batman movie, you know, it's like we can do more than one thing at one time, dude. We can, you know, care about what's happening in Ukraine and enjoy a Batman movie. It's sort of like that, where it's like you can pursue your meaningful things, like if you want to become better at your music, but you can also enjoy simple small talk with your, you know, uncomplicated buddy over here a couple times a week and go about your life. That's the thing. It was like the abruptness and the harshness of that boundary that he threw up. Like most of us would just be like, I'm just going to try to hang out with him maybe like once or twice a week so I can work on my music.
But in a setting like that, you can't really do that, can you?
I mean, right.
You will see that person multiple times a day, even if you lock yourself in your house. I mean,
and he would come over and he would try to, do exactly what he did.
I think that even if Colin had said, let's see each other less, it ultimately would have led to the same thing. I mean, when you right down to it, like, and again, you can have a friend for most of your life, your entire life, and eventually kind of feel like you're talking to each other about very little when you get together, and maybe there's something to that. But on the other hand, it's like when you've known each other for that long, what the fuck do you want to talk about? I mean, come on.
Right.
You wouldn't agree each other's presence to be enough to nourish you and fulfill you. It's not going to be Tracy and Hepburn every time you meet up because you know each other that well, and especially in this context. So in theory, you know, Siobhan's the one who leaves the island at the end, but really, if you came right down to it, the one who should have left the island if he wanted all of this fucking stimulation should have been Colin, but Colin's an old fucking fart and he's not going to go anywhere. Why should he go anywhere? Why should he change anything about his whole setup when he can demand that, you know, the people around him change? Which again, like, you get where he's coming from, but I mean, he's not going to get what he wants while he's living on this island.
Who did you find yourself between the two of them? Like, we talked about pivoting sympathies and things like that. Sure. Did you find yourself ultimately landing on one more than the other in terms of who you related to or not in this?
Oh, God, that's a tough... I mean, you're supposed to say Padraig, obviously.
Yeah.
And again, but there are so many times when...
he challenges that. He does.
Thinking, again, like the rest of the audience is probably... Because in the previews, there was the line. There was the line where Colin specifically says, here's what I'm going to do. Every time you talk to me from now on, I'm going to take the shears and I'm going to cut off one of my fingers. And again, I'm sitting there thinking, that's a funny line.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to be a hilarious movie. I didn't.
Yes.
When I sat down with my mother, like, you know, this is going to be really funny based on the previews that I've seen in a light comedy. And when that first finger came off, and I'm like, what the fuck have I done? Like, the end of the bridge. What the fuck have I done? Like, and then it just goes from there. I mean, but you've got to admire the fact to a certain... You don't have to admire it. The man's insane. But on the other hand, like with Harry, the guy said, you know, Harry was not Irish, but it's a very Irish thing, a very stubborn thing. You say you're going to do something, and someone challenges that. By God, you are going to do that thing. And the fact that wasn't enough, I mean, that's kind of what almost made me, even though he, again, his mental problems cannot be overstated, Colin, that was where I sort of had to land on his side to some degree of like, what is it going to take for this man to make you understand? Just don't talk to him. My God.
A person who would rather make it so that the reason that they ended their friendship with you, they couldn't do anymore because they cut their fucking finger off. Like, you can't play a goddamn fiddle with an amputated, fingers. He would rather end his ability to play his music, his one pursuit, than to continue talking to this person. Like, when someone says, I'm going to mutilate my fucking hand in order to illustrate to you how little I want to maintain a friendship. I mean, I can't imagine anything more illustrative and hurtful or, whatever to indicate. So yeah, the first finger, he does it. He goes through with it. He cuts the fucking finger off.
Yeah.
And not only does he do that, it happens after Polrick is convinced that maybe things are going to be okay because we talked and we had like a conversation and, whatever. And I don't know, because didn't that happen after the confrontation in the pub? Like where Colin was sitting with Dominic's father.
Correct.
And that's when Polrick he's had some whiskey and he's turned a little mean and very direct. And he has a very interesting, very well written and painful conversation in that bar that not only further illustrates that Polrick has no problem whatsoever spilling the tea on the abusive cop, that, the cop that's been beating up his kid at home, Dominic.
Well, far worse again, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, disgusting abuse going on there. And then actually have a very truthful, brutal discussion with Colin at the same time. And I found myself like going, yeah, good fucking point, man. Like, he's pointing out that, yeah, you can do this, but you're still a fucking asshole. Like, you could honestly set the boundary, but at the end of the day, you're still a fucking dickhead. Is really what that discussion came down to. And so it didn't matter because it was already after Colin had issued the finger slicing ultimatum. But, Polrick didn't think that Colin would follow through with that. So, he goes home and he wakes up the next day and he's talking to his sister. And all of a sudden he hears a thud on his front door at his house. And he opens it and there's a splotch of blood on the door. And you already fucking know that he threw his goddamn finger.
Your heart sinks because, again, you didn't think he was going to do it. Not going into the movie. But
no.
That is that, and you're saying, like, well, who would do something like that, And in the other room, I have, I'm a Jew. In the other room, I have a book of classic Jewish folklore.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. And there's so many stories, it's hard to draw a straight line between these two cultures. And yet, at the same time, one thing is a cornerstone of both, which is the silliest stubbornness that a human being can possibly conjure within themselves.
Oh.
So many bits of folklore about two stubborn men who ended up just sort of like disappearing up each other's asses from and the same way that, like, just like this thing with the fingers, that the thing that was their principle to begin with is the thing that they're perfectly willing to set on fire for the larger principle of being right.
Yeah.
And so, like, so that's kind of an interesting, because this is, what we're looking at, I think, is a whimsically dark folk tale of Ireland.
Very much so. Yes.
The premise of the fingers. You've also got Colin kind of tromping along the hills and meadows with the long black coat and the big slouch-brimmed hat.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, at the same time, the way it's presented, it's believable enough. Even after Colin cuts off the first finger, we figure, he probably cauterized it later, and yeah, the adrenaline and mania is probably making him keep going. When the rest of them go, and Colin is not in shock and bleeding to death, we're starting to feel like we're watching a very morbid fairy tale to a certain degree.
Yeah, and that's, yes, and that's the thing. I didn't expect that part at all. As things wind on, the sort of duel between these two, after he cuts off the first finger, that's shocking enough. And for a while there, they kind of avoid each other, right? They
were doing well. Or as Colin said, they were doing well. Colin says, he wasn't. He says, okay, I was doing well.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. But, things continue to develop, and, Colin is working on his music, even without the finger, which, he can't play as well, but, he's courting.
At that point, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's, the whole other side story with Dominic and the friendship that has developed sort of between Pádraig and Dominic. But here's where things start to collide, because things aren't getting easier for Pádraig at all. He's still not dealing okay with this separation of friendship and what. He's becoming a bit more wrathful. He's becoming a bit more bitter and resentful.
Because he's a child, as we said. The child always needs to know why. Everything has to make sense to a child. They need to know why. And they'll throw a tantrum when things don't make sense, and they're told just because.
And that's the end of the innocence too, right? Eventually, when those tantrums die down, that's when the adulthood kind of finally sets in, or we hope it does for people. Like, you no longer have the tantrum, you just kind of absorb the blow and carry on. And you develop calluses around your whole body to, help with that. But, sometimes things get through, but for the most part, you deal with it. And I think he's kind of forming that callous shell around him, but to himself, he's very internally dealing with this. But then you have Dominic, who is by far, I would say, the most traumatized and abused and troubled person in this entire story. The one dealing with the real shit. The one who is being wrecked day and night by his abusive fucking father. This poor kid. And for some reason, aside from what Pádraig was in the beginning, this guy still is probably the most optimistic person in his own way. Like, he has his dreams, he has aspirations and hopes, and despite all this, but then that starts to all fall apart around him as well.
Yeah. Especially, I was going to say optimism. That's a weird word to use, given
it's a hard word, but he still is kind of like, he sees some hope in life. He thinks he's gonna maybe find a girl and get off the island or something, that there's still a point to all this bullshit of life. And that star fades from his eyes eventually, very much, when he continues to interact with Pádraig and he realizes that Pádraig is sort of become not the good, nice man that he was known to be. And that kind of disillusions him a bit more. Again, we're seeing the kind of like death of innocence across the movie here.
Definitely. And as you said, just a sad, creepy, heartbreaking performance by Barry Keoghan. And, even though he is in so many ways a victim, at the same time, he is very, very hard to like in this movie.
Very much. Oh, God.
Basically just an obnoxious chimpanzee of a child who
yeah.
has no self-control and is just extremely obnoxious and unpleasant. So, but the thing about his character that's interesting to me goes back to In Bruges, where we were talking about these people who are able to, in their minds, elevate themselves by looking at somebody else and saying, at least I'm not that person. At least I have that line. Dominic is clearly a foil for Pádraig in terms of these clingy, pathetic, unwanted friendships.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Pádraig at least sees himself as, and is to a certain degree, more high-functioning than Dominic is. But it's still the same dynamic. And generally, Pádraig is too nice a person to do what Colin has done, and push him away completely. But on the other hand, in his mind, he's saying, why did Colin push me away? It's not like I'm Dominic, right?
Right.
At least I'm not that. And so, like you said, then, even that dynamic shifts, because Pádraig gives the music student a ride, which is a hilarious scene. The punchline had me doubling up all over again. That's one of the best setups to a joke I've ever heard. But, as you said, Pádraig in the pub a few scenes earlier, extolling the virtues of being nice, being a good person, and this is not something a nice person would do. And it seems like he's maybe just trying it out. He's seeing
Yeah.
it's easier to be not nice than it is to be nice. Will it make him feel better? Will it put him in a position of power? And it doesn't. And then, yeah, Dominic, on the one hand, praises him for that rant against Colin in the pub and says even that, while Pádraig was being mean, he thought it was the most interesting Pádraig had ever been.
Yes.
But when he learns about the music student thing, he says, that's the meanest thing I've ever heard, and I didn't think you were that kind of person. And Dominic walks away from him, and when that happens, you have got to reevaluate your fucking life and the choices that you've made, don't you?
Right.
And one other thing, too, though, that has me sort of scratching my head about this movie, and the last time that I watched it, too, was Colin's relationship to Dominic's father, the cop. Because the cop is also not just a dull person, although he is absolutely a dull person. All he can talk about is like executions and shit. And from the look of it, Colin's not really that interested in that either. And beats people up without much reason. And everyone knows that he molests his kid and beats him, apparently. But Colin is still fine hanging out with the cop. He's just
agreed.
He's really actually fine hanging out with all these other people who I'm guessing mostly don't enrich his life either. It's just Pádraig for some reason, just him, which really puts the bite when you come right down on it, you know.
Oh, and yeah, you could see that scene in the pub when Colin and the cop were, you know, Dominic's father were sitting there together. I think that's really when Pádraig became galvanized. Yeah. You know, to say you don't want to hang with me, but you want to hang with this motherfucker. Yeah, that's a problem. It's no longer just like a woe is me kind of situation of my friend doesn't like me anymore. It's like, no, you prefer to hang out with assholes.
The one who beat him up specifically.
Yes. And that's the interesting thing too, though, because while all this is going on, this feud is going on. And of course, you know, we have all these other things happening at the same time. The cop and Pádraig do not get along at all. And he doesn't appreciate Pádraig spreading around town that he's beating and molesting his kid. The cop beats him up, you know, but then Colin comes along and puts him in the coach and takes him back home, and they don't say a word. Mm-hmm. So it's like, amid all of this fighting between the two of them and the dislike and the disdain and all that, there's like this undercurrent of like, okay, despite all this shit that's happening up here, at the end of it, we're still, you know, humans, and we're still going to care for each other on a human fundamental level. Even if that fucking means, though, that Colin is cutting his goddamn fingers off to make a point.
Well, Colin, again, at no point during any of his tirades about his reasoning behind all of this, at no point did Colin ever say to Pádraig, it's because I hate you.
Yeah.
It's because I think you're a bad person. It's because I simply think that you're a piece of shit. Because none of that's true. Colin doesn't feel that way about Pádraig at all. He's just bored with the conversation with this guy and just doesn't want to talk to him anymore. That's it. It doesn't mean that, like, he didn't feel bad watching him get his ass whipped. And, you know, the human thing, as you say, is to do exactly what he did, which, put him up in the thing and take him home. But just as long as you don't talk to me, Pádraig, please. And he said, please. He begged him at multiple points in the movie.
You know, given to what you said, like where they are and when they are, like there's no other way to deal with this because, like you said, you could normally, if this was an online acquaintance or someone you worked with, you could easily ghost them now. You can find a way to avoid them and just not have that discussion, but you just can't do that. And so that to me just shows too, like the confinement that they're in. It adds a really interesting element of claustrophobia to this because you can't get off this island. I mean, realistically, although Colin, I think you're right. Colin could have tried if his aspirations were that high.
Well, and again, Siobhan got off the island, but the funny it's kind of funny that you used the word claustrophobic because although emotionally it kind of really is, the cinematography is the exact opposite.
It's so wide open.
Huge skies and huge tracts of beautiful emerald land. And it's just a biggest Irish frontier it's gorgeous. It's like a postcard in every shot. So it should be the opposite of that. And yet,
but it's like those contrasts you were talking about with McDonagh. Yeah, he loves those contrasts. And then also, apparently, he made this directive to the composer who wrote the score, telling them, we're not going to use any traditional Irish music in this. He didn't want any Irish music.
Bold choice.
Because it's like, we're gonna bring in, it's gonna be, again, you're gonna see Ireland, but it's not gonna be, you're gonna be able to put this anywhere in the world, and it's gonna work because, again, he's telling a human story. What I love too is, of course, this continues to get a little more absurd and gory as it goes along, because, again, Brendan Gleeson has cut off all of his fingers, all 4 of his fingers.
No, thumb too.
Oh, he did cut off his thumb. That's
Remember,
right.
He said cut off. We were going, and then he had nothing on that hand.
Yeah. So after that little confrontation, the last confrontation that he had with him, where he admitted, it sounded like they were having, actually, it wasn't really a confrontation. It was a discussion, where, Padraig actually like busts down Colum's door and is like, we're going to have a talk. We're just going to sit and talk. And eventually they start to talk, and they start to kind of get along, and Colin seems like he's loosening up a little bit. Like, maybe he's starting to think to himself, maybe I've been a little bit of an asshole. Padraig's like, all right, man, I'll meet you up at the pub, and, see you later. And then right before he leaves, because he's a fucking child. He's so naive about the shit that he does and the repercussions of it, that he tells Colin that he sent his student, or sent Colum's student who was there to visit him, back to Ireland with some bullshit story about his dad getting hit by a bread van or whatnot. He admits this to Colin like it's nothing at all. Like, oh, now that I told that student of yours to get the fuck off our island, we don't have to worry about anything anymore. So I'll meet you back at the pub. All right, see you later, buddy. And it's like, yeah. So at that point, Colin has decided, oh, it's like that. And then he goes and gets his shears, cuts off all the fingers, and then takes them back over to Padraig's house, where at this point he throws all of the fingers at the door and walks away. And also keep in mind that Siobhan, the sister, has left the island by this point. She's no longer there. She's taken a job over on the mainland. She's tired of dealing with the bullshit of this feud and all the other lack of opportunities on the island. So she's free. She's, so Padraig is, got the house to himself. He can bring his pet donkey Ginny in the house whenever he wants to. It's great.
If only he had done that.
If only, because Ginny the donkey decides to try to eat those fingers, and she chokes and dies.
That's a rough moment. Wow.
Yeah, this is like his one friend that he has left, right? This animal has been, his constant companion through all of this.
Exactly.
And now she's dead because of this feud. And it, again, to bring up the Irish Civil War and that sort of allegory that people point to, it just shows how, these petty disputes can go on to a point, and then innocents get caught in the crossfire.
Well, and also that just something that starts off small just pinwheels into something that is just a gargantuan and violent and ridiculous conflagration.
Yes.
And I think that's, the fact that we hear the constant sounds of artillery on the other side of the water. It's a fantastic little touch. And I want to backtrack a little bit to what you were saying about that scene where Padraig, comes this after the first finger is already gone, which should have been enough. That should have been enough. And everyone around him said that should have been enough. What the fuck more do you need? Leave the man alone. He has shown you he's serious. Leave him alone. But of course he can't do that. And he thinks that if he's mean, that'll somehow snap Colin out of it and make him his friend again, because clearly his niceness is not doing it. And he, in his childish brain, is thinking maybe it's the fact that I'm nice. Maybe that's what he doesn't like about me anymore. So one way to interpret it, which I think fantastic, is the way that you kind of laid it out, where it was going to be okay. It could have been okay right up until right before he left, when he talked about the music studio. That's where it's like, no. But for me, another way to interpret it, which is kind of how I was looking at it during this rewatch, was that from the moment Parag comes through the door and is acting like an asshole, and just Colin looks up at him and is just exhausted. What the fuck are you doing? Just everything about him is like, what does it take? He's not going to yell at him. He's not even going to be unkind to him because he's fucking exhausted. He just doesn't know how to fight this battle anymore, other than to cut off more of his own fingers. And even that hasn't worked this time. And he's just like, so I kind of got the sense that even though after that, they kind of settled into a bit of a conversation, that from the word go, Colin is like, no matter how I may as well not be mean to him, because no matter how this conversation goes, I'm going to have to cut off 4 more fingers.
That's a good point. Yeah.
He has left me with no other choice. So, yeah, okay, the music's going great. I just finished it. I have a title.
Oh, yeah. He had written this whole piece. Yeah, Colin had finished his music.
So, I mean, lambasting him is not going to help. The finger thing didn't work. And more words are not going to work. So I kind of feel like the entire time, Colin already knew that he was going to cut off the other 4 fingers.
I think you make a really good point. I think there was a part of it that was kind of leading us into a false sense of security.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we wanted to believe. I think I constantly have seen it through Polrick's sides, but that's not without then stopping and pivoting to Column's side and realizing the purity and admirability of it in its own brutal way. Like, fuck, I wish I could just be like that, but I can't, because I'm a people pleaser.
It's a whole thing. Guy says out loud, if I ever took a kid's life, the next second I'd take my own. Guy says out loud in front of a room full of people, mind you.
Yeah.
The next time you talk to me, I'm going to cut a finger off. Well, by God, he's going to do that thing. He's not going to wrestle with it. He's not going to say, well, maybe I'm being a little bit crazy here. No, God damn it. This is the mentality. And of course, as you say, he completed the piece of music. Parag says, well, what's it called? And he says, the Banshees of Inisherin. And Parag says, but there are no Banshees in Inisherin, aren't there? And it's easy to call Mrs. McCormick the Banshee in this piece because she's a creepy old lady. But I don't think she is.
Oh.
Because what do Banshees do? They wail and they scream and they lament. And that's what Colin is doing in his own quiet way, screaming to be fucking heard and no one's listening. Same's true of Parag to some degree. Definitely Siobhan. And absolutely even Dominic. They're all the fucking Banshees. They're all just, crying out, but they don't have the language, and everyone else just won't hear them.
Except for like fucking Dominic. And here's what I want to touch back to him before we get to the sort of final culmination of everything. Because the whole Dominic subplot being that, he's, again, the village idiot. People just don't treat him with much respect. His dad beats him, molests him. He had a little bit of hope in that he thought he could somehow court and win over Polrick's sister, Siobhan. Right. She's a good few years older than him. And not only that, she's a smart, well-read woman. She's not going to go for the teenage kind of bumbling, asshat that Dominic is. But the scene at the lake when he actually tries to, formally court her, and the way she rejects him is probably if Colin had thought to use even half the thought and care that she used in her rejection of Dominic, then I don't know. On the one hand, I'd say maybe we wouldn't have gone this far, but then we look at what happened to Dominic, because when she rejected him, we talk about, again, despair. And I mentioned in the last episode, the aged despair versus young despair.
Yes.
Aged despair being in Column's situation where he's looking at the life he's lived and he doesn't have much time left and he wants to make use of it. He realized he hasn't used his life to its fullest and he's running out of time. And then you look at the despair of Dominic, this young man who has been beaten and molested and mistreated and ridiculed and then finally rejected by a woman that he hoped would be like a salvation for him. And he just sees this long life ahead of him full of nothing. And he says specifically, so much for that dream.
Yeah.
And then he walks off and we don't see him again until he's a dead body in the water. And it's not stated whether he jumped or slipped and fell, but I think we kind of
But they pull him in with the hook.
The hook that he presented in the beginning of the movie. Yeah.
And this is a character who is just handicapped enough mentally and emotionally to know that there's something wrong with him, but not quite be able to put his own finger on what it is. Which is fucking heartbreaking when you have as many tics and, just strange physical kind of stuff and, the fact that he's completely off-putting to absolutely everyone who encounters him, even his so-called friend. No one wants to be around him. And again, he feels like he should know why, but he struggles with it. He doesn't know why. And so ultimately, no hope or future for him. And certainly not on an island like that, but not anywhere. He certainly wouldn't have been cut out to do anything else or go anywhere.
Honestly, in some weird way, it's interesting because Siobhan, after she leaves and goes to the mainland, she writes to Padraig and says, I have spare room for you. Come over. You can have Dominic watch the animals and all this. And it's like, wow, now that Dominic's out of the picture because he's dead, this kid had a purpose. This kid could have done, it just shows that even he could have played a role and he couldn't. He was all caught up in that web. He's just the tragic character through and through in this.
Except for Siobhan, really, when you come right.
Right. So we have the dead donkey and we have Padraig's real sense of just sharpened rage at this point. He's fucking done. This feud, even if he'd egged it on, by this point, someone he loved and valued died because of it. And now he just really wants to have his revenge. So he comes into the pub where Colin is sitting and he's like, I'm going to burn your house down tomorrow at 2:00. And you better still be in it, or hopefully you'll still be in it. And let your dog out. Because I don't want to burn your dog.
Right.
He's just fueled with rage. He's wearing all black. He's looking very formal at this point. In the beginning of the film, he looked very rustic.
Yes.
By the end of the film, he looks like a sharpened, outlaw. Almost.
Your morning clothes were your morning clothes back then. Mm-hmm. Obviously, once you put not going to the rustic, you're going to, look a bit more formal. But, what's funny to me is that when that happens, when that shift occurs, and you use the word, he's out for revenge.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, yes, absolutely, that is the word to use. Ultimately, when you boil it down, what has he wanted from Colin that Colin has suddenly decided to deprive him of this entire time from the very beginning? What did he have that he doesn't have with Colin anymore? A very important relationship.
Yes.
Relationship in which they are significant in each other's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And now he will have that.
Right.
A very different iteration. If they cannot have that companionship, then they will have this version of a relationship. But either way, they will mean a great deal to each other in the days to come. He is absolutely going to make that happen. And that's kind of a funny sort of ending for it as well, of just either way, we'll be close. We'll be close.
And what's interesting too around that whole discussion is how nobody is really trying to intervene or say anything at this point. It's like if you come into a bar and you walk up to your enemy and you're like, I'm going to burn your fucking house down tomorrow. And then it's just like, all right, cool. All right. Well, I guess that's going to fucking happen.
Again, certain cultures, when two men decide that it's one or the other and it can't be both, then everyone else knows to stay the fuck out of the way. With good reason.
Yeah.
They've tried, all of them tried intervening up until now. The priest, the sister, the barman, all of them, they are smart enough. And again, they're a simple folk. But there are ways that things are done, and they understand that this is the part where everyone backs the fuck off and lets one of them kill the other, because that's the only way this ends. And the cop's clearly not going to do fuck all about it. Yeah.
And what's interesting, too, is Colin, he's in the house at the end of the movie. Or, I'm sorry, when he comes to light the fire, when Paula comes to light it. But then the house catches on fire. We kind of assume that he doesn't exit the house. But he did let his dog out. And of course, though, after the house is burning down, we come to find that Colin did at some point exit the house. Mm-hmm. And while all this is going on, of course, he answers his sister back and says, I thank you for the offer. I'm not leaving. My life is here.
Now. He has a reason to stay. He has a relationship back. Not quite.
Absolutely.
But, he's committed to it now.
And, so, of course, the two meet on the beach after, when we find that Colin decided to exit the house. The dog is there and all that. They kind of have their thing. And so, Colin says, well, I guess we're square. You took my house. And Padraig then says, if you'd stayed in the house, we would be square. But you didn't.
That's right.
It's like, motherfucker is not giving this up.
No.
He is not done. We took a very innocent, childlike man and turned him into a vengeance demon, essentially. He's not done. He's pissed.
Yeah. When we started this movie, again, 4 main characters when you really come down to it. Padraig, Colin, Siobhan, and Dominic. Now, of those 4 characters, one of them started off this movie happy and content and feeling as though he didn't really need a higher purpose in his life because, he had his friend and his sister and his donkey, and that was enough for him.
Yes.
The other 3 all badly wanted to find some meaning or some purpose or some fulfillment in their lives, and they were coming a cropper, all 3 of them.
Yeah.
End of this movie, Padraig has decided that not only does he need a purpose, but now he has found a purpose.
Oh, my God.
Because the purpose was taken away from him. So now he has his purpose, his new one, which is to, again, commit to this locked-in thing that he's got with Colin. I mean, you said he was kind of sharpened. Yeah, he's kind of sharpened, because he knows what he wants. He knows what he needs, what he thinks will fulfill him.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, we talk about the Irish Civil War that was happening as the backdrop of this story, but I think we can also compare it to our own Civil War or any country that has faced a civil war. If you come to a certain, even if the ceasefire happens and you've decided that in this active conflict, we've killed as many people as we're going to kill, and that's that. But even though the war has ended, the formal war, there's a Cold War. There's what's happening, what has always happened between the American North and South since the Civil War. And I think we can see this kind of playing out here. But, and what reinforces this for me is, at the very end on that beach, when Colin says, "Thanks for looking after my dog." And Colin says, and Padraig says, "Anytime." And his face warms up in that moment, because it's like, on the one hand, we're still enemies, but on the end, again, we bring this moral code and this really interesting thread that, again, McDonagh kind of weaves through his stories. It's like, we're going to hate each other until the end of time, but I'm not going to let your fucking dog die. And, it's so I hate to call this like a, a hopeful story in that sense. But when you're looking at this day and age and the lack of civility that we're dealing with in daily life, that we feel like those kind of customs and feelings are gone, just to see that shown in a story and that people are still maybe thinking that way. It's like, we're at war. We don't really love each other. The North and the South will never have a love for each other, but we have friends and family across those divides. We have things about each other's cultures we probably do enjoy and respect. There's common ground. There's something there on the base level. And it kind of ends for me on that thing of like, maybe these two will end up living together alone on that fucking island one day as old men who bitterly hate each other, but they're stuck together.
It goes 100 different ways. Again, that's the beauty of the ending. But the thing about the Irish Civil War in particular, being even more connected to this story specifically, is that at least once in the movie we hear, and the good news is that on the mainland, this war's coming to an end any day now. We, again, looking back, because that was 1923, how many ceasefires that didn't hold up? How many times will we this war's going to come to an end any minute now? For 80 fucking years, this thing went on with these people killing each other, and it could come back. Any given moment, it could come back. But, so I love that little chirpy optimism of, don't worry, it's all going to come to a tidy end, and like knowing, no, it won't, and this ain't going to either. this could, as you say, they can fight this war between themselves for, as Colin said, another 12 years at least before maybe expires first. But I mean, it could be that, or they could could kill the other tomorrow.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that ending.
I do too. I mean, it is one of those endings that actually makes you feel like you want to check in on those characters now and then in your own head and be like, okay, what's going on today on the island? These guys, it's fun exercise in fan fiction even to write out something like that, because it's a beautiful story in that sense that it feels very self-contained but very infinite at the same time. So it's beautiful, and again, I think the infinite thing but also not kind of again plays out in the scenery of where it feels very closed in, but it's also just, you look at these vistas and these cliffs and this ocean and everything, and you just think, how can anything bad happen on this island?
Like, does God care about this small, beautiful place? Does the universe even know that Inisherin exists?
Right.
Or any of the people on it, or what the fuck they care about each other's lives, But I think you're right. There's definitely potential for fan fiction, but I think then in fan fiction, the way that would go would be that like Porrig gets onto the TARDIS with the 10th Doctor, and they go to Narnia and end up blowing each other's eyes. That's kind of how these things usually go.
I would watch that.
And one of them is an animal of some kind, and I don't know.
I mean, yeah, if we get furries in it, then we're definitely good. I mean, that's got a lot of fandom potential.
Absolutely. I'll get right on.
Oh my God. I have absolutely loved talking these two movies with you and just having that discussion, because it's so interesting to hear, like, we'll watch the same thing and we'll see it in a different way, and then we'll talk that back and forth, and look, we're still friends. Isn't that cool? Like, we didn't have a fight in the middle and be like, oh, you don't see this like I do? Fuck you, bro. You're not like me. But no. Look,
just don't kill my donkey and everything will fucking work out.
No, your donkey's cool by me, bro. I love a fucking donkey.
No, I love being on this show, and I'm always happy to come back. And I'm still very excited, by the way, that we're going to be talking about Winona Ryder in a corset with Kel when she comes on.
Oh, man. Yeah, you better get on her, because we're going to definitely be having that Bram Stoker's Dracula conversation in the near future. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And I know there's so much more we could talk here, but we're going to leave it for now and come back with another movie real soon. And just loved having you here. And if you have any questions, anybody out there listening to this, or if you have some thoughts on these movies, Email me at dddarknesstime@gmail.com. Hit me up on the Twitter. Hit me up on the Patreon. Hit me up on the Facebook page. I'm everywhere. That's all I got for now. So we'll be back with another movie real soon. So take care. This episode was produced by yours truly, Allison Dixon, and wouldn't be possible without the amazing contributions of countless friends, family, and Patreon supporters. Big shouts also go out to Nathaniel Dixon for all the show art, as well as Spencer Morlock and Ken Dixon for the music. I'll be back with something new next week. In the meantime, you know what to do. Be good, you little ding-dongs.